The transport shuttle hummed through the void between stars, carrying its cargo of nervous students toward the Kepler Station research facility. Inside the cramped passenger compartment, 23 young beings from across the Galactic Federation sat in uncomfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what awaited them. Sarah Chun pressed her face against the small viewport, watching the massive research station grow larger as they approached. The human exchange student had been looking forward to this field trip for months. As one of only 3 humans accepted into the prestigious Xenobiology Advanced Studies program at the University of New Geneva, she knew this opportunity was rare. Most species in the Federation still viewed humans as newcomers, barely worthy of serious academic consideration. The Altarian student sitting across from her, Zefka, chittered nervously through his breathing slits. His crystalline carapace reflected the dim cabin lights as he spoke to his companion. I still cannot believe the professors chose to include a human in this expedition. Their species has barely left their home system. His friend, a tall vegan with flowing tentacles instead of hair, nodded in agreement. The creatures they will show us today have driven seasoned researchers to madness. How can such a primitive species handle what we might see? Sarah pretended not to hear them, though their words stung. She had worked twice as hard as any other student to earn her place here. While her classmates relied on advanced genetic modifications and cybernetic enhancements that have been standard in their cultures for millennia, she had only her natural human intelligence and determination. Professor Kethmore, a distinguished Centaurian with silver fur and, for arms, stood at the front of the shuttle. His deep voice commanded attention as he began the final briefing. Students, we are about to witness some of the most dangerous and psychologically disturbing life forms ever discovered. The creatures housed in Kepler Station's maximum security biolabs have been collected from the darkest corners of the galaxy. He paused, his 4 golden eyes scanning the group. These entities possess abilities that can shatter minds, induce primal terror, and, in some cases, drive observers to complete psychological breakdown. The station's safety protocols exist for good reason. You will observe from behind protective barriers, and you must follow all instructions without question. A Rigelian student with blue-scaled skin raised her hand. Professor, what kind of creatures are we talking about exactly? Apex predators from dead worlds. Beings that evolved in environments so hostile that they developed supernatural survival abilities. Shadow wraiths from the Nightmare Nebula. Psychic parasites from the Madness Sector. Each one represents evolution taken to its most terrifying extreme. Sarah felt her heart rate increase, but not from fear. Excitement coursed through her veins. This was why she had fought so hard to join this program. While other species had long ago eliminated natural predators from their worlds and engineered fear out of their genetics, humans still carried the ancient instincts of a species that had clawed its way to the top of a dangerous food chain. The shuttle docked with Kepler Station with a soft thud. Through the airlock, Sarah could see the sterile white corridors of the research facility. Warning lights blinked at regular intervals, and she could hear the hum of powerful containment systems. Dr. Raina Voss, the station's chief xenobiologist, greeted them at the entrance. The stern-faced woman wore the standard white lab coat over her station uniform, and her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun. Welcome to Kepler Station. I am Dr. Voss, and I will be your guide today. Before we begin, I must stress that what you are about to see has traumatized some of the galaxy's most experienced researchers. She gestured toward a wall display showing the facility's layout. Our specimens are contained in Level 7, the maximum security section. Each containment unit uses a combination of energy barriers, psychic dampeners, and environmental controls specifically designed for each creature. Even with these precautions, we have had incidents. What kind of incidents? Asked Zefka, his voice trembling slightly. Last month, a senior researcher from the Andromedan Institute observed our shadow crawler for less than 30 seconds. He has not spoken since. Another scientist who studied our void stalker required complete memory restructuring after experiencing what she described as the hunger that devours souls. The group exchanged worried glances. Several students stepped closer to their companions, seeking comfort in numbers. Dr. Voss continued, "The psychological impact of these creatures cannot be understated. They represent primal fears that most civilized species have forgotten. Today, you will look into the face of evolution's darkest achievements." As they walked through the station's corridors, Sarah noticed how the other students stayed clustered together, while she found herself naturally taking point position. The research facility fascinated her. Every surface was designed for function over comfort, and she could sense the immense power of the containment systems humming beneath the floor. They passed laboratory windows where scientists in full protective gear worked on specimens she couldn't identify. In one room, she glimpsed what looked like a writhing mass of shadow that seemed to absorb light around it. In another, something that might have been crystalline moved with predatory grace. "Our first specimen, Dr. Voss announced as they stopped before a massive reinforced window, "is what we call the Terror Drake. It was discovered on Mortis Prime, a planet where nothing else survived. This creature hunted in the ruins of dead civilizations, feeding not just on flesh, but on fear itself." The viewing chamber beyond the window was dimly lit, making it difficult to see details. Slowly, emergency lighting activated, revealing the creature within. Most of the students immediately stepped back or closed their eyes. The Terror Drake was a nightmare made flesh, standing nearly 3 meters tall on powerful hind legs. Its hide was matte black, seeming to absorb light, while bony spikes jutted from its shoulders and spine. 6 red eyes glowed with malevolent intelligence, and its mouth opened to reveal rows of crystalline teeth designed for maximum psychological impact rather than mere feeding. But what made the creature truly terrifying was not its physical appearance. It radiated an aura of wrongness, a psychic presence that whispered of death and despair. Several students began to hyperventilate, while others backed away from the window entirely. The Terror Drake turned its attention to the group of observers, scanning them with its multiple eyes. Its gaze passed over the trembling Altarians, the cowering vegans, and the others who had pressed themselves against the far wall. Then its eyes found Sarah. She stood alone at the window, hands pressed against the reinforced glass, meeting its gaze without flinching. Where others saw a monster, she saw a magnificent predator perfectly adapted to its environment. The creature's psychic emanations washed over her, carrying images of fear and death, but they felt familiar rather than alien. Humans had evolved alongside creatures like this. Not as advanced, perhaps, but the same principle applied. Tigers, bears, wolves, sharks. Humanity had shared its world with apex predators for millions of years. The instinctive recognition of danger, the adrenaline response, the fight-or-flight mechanism. These were tools, not weaknesses. The Terror Drake's 6 eyes fixed on her with what seemed like confusion. Its massive head tilted slightly, as if trying to understand something unexpected. For a moment, predator and human regarded each other across the barrier of reinforced glass and energy fields. Then, something unprecedented happened. The creature took a step backward. Dr. Voss noticed immediately. "Extraordinary," she whispered, consulting her tablet. "In 3 years of observation, the Terror Drake has never retreated from contact. It typically becomes more aggressive when it detects observers." The other students had noticed too. They stared at Sarah with a mixture of amazement and disbelief. Zefka's crystalline carapace clicked nervously as he spoke. How was she not affected? The psychic pressure from that thing should have collapsed her mind. Professor Kethmore approached the window, studying both Sarah and the creature with intense interest. "Miss Chun, describe what you were experiencing." Sarah considered her words carefully. "It's afraid," she said simply. "Afraid?" Dr. Voss checked her instruments again. "Our sensors show no change in the creature's stress indicators." Its psychic output remains at maximum intensity. Not afraid of me specifically, Sarah clarified, still watching the Terror Drake. It's afraid because it doesn't understand what I am. This thing evolved to hunt prey that would run or cower. It feeds on fear and despair. But I'm not giving it either of those emotions. She turned to face the group. Where I come from, we had legends about creatures like this. Monsters that hid in shadows and hunted in the dark. But we also had stories about the humans who faced them. My ancestors survived because they learned to look monsters in the eye and stand their ground. The Terror Drake continued to observe her, its massive form tense with uncertainty. Its psychic emanations had shifted from aggressive hunger to something resembling wariness. For the first time in its captivity, the apex predator had encountered something it couldn't immediately categorize as prey. Dr. Voss was frantically taking notes. This is unprecedented. The Terror Drake's behavior has never shown this level of hesitation. It's almost as if it recognizes something familiar in her response pattern. Perhaps, Professor Kethmore mused, we have underestimated the evolutionary advantages of humanity's extended exposure to natural predators. While most species in the Federation eliminated such threats millennia ago, humans retained their prey response mechanisms. The Regelian student who had asked earlier questions now looked at Sarah with newfound respect. You mean she's not afraid because her species never forgot how to be afraid properly? More than that, Sarah replied, placing her hand against the glass again. The Terror Drake watched the movement, but did not approach. Fear is a tool. It keeps you alive when used correctly. But courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to act in spite of it. This creature expects its prey to break down when faced with fear. Instead, I'm using that fear to stay alert and ready. As if responding to her words, the Terror Drake let out a low sound that the translation systems struggled to process. It was part growl, part something else entirely, perhaps a form of acknowledgement between predators. Dr. Voss looked up from her tablet with amazement. The vocal pattern analysis suggests respect. How is that possible? It recognizes what it's looking at, Sarah said. Another predator, not prey. The implications of this moment were just beginning to sink in as Dr. Voss' second observation chamber was larger than the first, with multiple viewing windows arranged in a semicircle around a complex containment system. Dr. Voss led them to the central viewing position, where thick reinforced barriers and shimmering energy fields created layers of protection between observers and specimen. This next creature, Dr. Voss announced, was recovered from a screaming void, a region of space where 17 different expeditions simply vanished. We call it the Nightmare Weaver. Professor Kethmore activated his recording device. Students, take note of your psychological state before observation begins. The Nightmare Weaver feeds on consciousness itself, creating targeted hallucinations designed to exploit each observer's deepest fears. The other students clustered together at the back of the viewing area. After witnessing Sarah's encounter with the Terror Drake, several had begun to look at her with something approaching reverence, though they still maintained their distance. The vegan student, Yelin, whispered to his companions, perhaps we should observe how the human reacts before approaching ourselves. Dr. Voss activated the containment chamber's lighting system. The space beyond the barriers seemed to shift and writhe, making it difficult to focus on any single point. Slowly, a form began to materialize in the center of the chamber. The Nightmare Weaver defied easy description. Its body appeared to be composed of living shadow, but shadows that moved independently of any light source. Tendrils of darkness extended from its core, reaching toward the viewing windows before being stopped by the energy barriers. Most disturbing were its sensory organs. Not eyes exactly, but apertures in reality that seemed to look directly into the minds of observers. The moment the creature became fully visible, chaos erupted among the students. Zefka began clicking rapidly in distress, his crystalline carapace shifting between colors as his fear response activated. The walls are closing in, he gasped. The chamber is shrinking. We are trapped. The Regelian student screamed as she apparently saw something that wasn't there. Fire! Everything is burning. Can't you see the flames? Yelin collapsed to his knees, tentacles writhing in terror. The void is calling. I can hear the voices of the lost expeditions. They want us to join them in the darkness. Professor Keth Moore tried to maintain control, despite his own obvious distress. Remember your training. The hallucinations are not real. Focus on documented facts about your environment. Dr. Voss monitored her instruments with growing concern. Psychic output is off the charts. The creature is targeting each observer individually, crafting specific fear scenarios based on their species' evolutionary anxiety patterns. But, once again, all eyes gradually turned to Sarah. She stood at the primary viewing window, hands pressed against the barrier, studying the Nightmare Weaver with intense concentration. The creature's reality-bending appendages reached toward her position, probing for mental vulnerabilities to exploit. Fascinating, she murmured, seemingly unaffected by whatever psychic assault the creature was launching at her. Dr. Voss checked her readings twice. Impossible. The Nightmare Weaver is directing its full attention at Miss Chun, but her stress indicators remain stable. How are you resisting its influence? Sarah tilted her head, watching as the creature's form shifted and changed. I'm not resisting it. I'm analyzing it. This thing is trying to show me my worst fears, but it doesn't understand what those fears actually are. What do you mean? Professor Keth Moore asked, fighting to maintain his composure as his own hallucinations continued to assault him. It's showing me darkness, isolation, the unknown, Sarah explained. But those aren't fears for my species, they're challenges. Humans evolved exploring dark caves, crossing unknown oceans, venturing into unmapped territories. Darkness isn't something we run from. It's something we investigate. The Nightmare Weaver seemed to sense her resistance. Its form shifted more rapidly, cycling through different manifestations as it searched for something that would trigger the expected fear response. Sarah watched each transformation with scientific curiosity. Now it's trying predatory imagery, she continued, as if narrating a nature documentary. Large teeth, claws, aggressive postures. But, again, it doesn't understand that these are familiar concepts to humans. We lived alongside creatures like this for millions of years. The creature's attacks grew more frantic. Its shadow, tendrils lashed against the energy barriers with increasing force, and its reality-distorting emanations reached maximum intensity. It's getting desperate, Sarah observed. It can sense that its normal feeding patterns aren't working, so it's increasing power output. But that just makes it easier to study its methodology. She turned to Dr. Voss. Your instruments must be picking up some interesting data. The creature is essentially giving you a complete demonstration of its capabilities because it can't understand why they're not working on me. Dr. Voss stared at her tablet in amazement. You're right. We're getting more detailed psychic resonance patterns in these few minutes than we've collected in months of previous observations. It's as if the creature is overexerting itself, trying to affect you. The Nightmare Weaver suddenly stopped its attacks and withdrew to the center of its containment chamber. Its shadowy form condensed into a more solid shape as it regarded Sarah through the barriers. For the first time since its capture, the creature appeared uncertain. It's learning, Sarah said with excitement. This is remarkable. The creature is adapting its approach because its standard methodology failed. Professor Keth Moore, finally, recovering from his own hallucinations, approached the viewing window. Miss Chun, you mentioned that the creature doesn't understand your fears. What would actually frighten a human in this scenario? Sarah considered the question seriously. Genuine threats to people I care about. The slow destruction of knowledge and learning. The heat death of a universe. But mostly the loss of curiosity itself. This creature feeds on fear and despair, but humans are fundamentally driven by the need to understand and explore. Even when we're terrified, we want to know why. As if responding to her words, the Nightmare Weaver began to change again. Its form became less chaotic, more structured. The random tendrils of shadow organized themselves into purposeful patterns, and its reality-distorting emanations shifted frequency. Incredible, Dr. Voss breathed. It's adapting its hunting strategy in real time based on your responses. This behavior has never been documented. The other students had gradually recovered from their induced hallucinations and were now watching the interaction with fascination rather than terror. Zefka approached the viewing window cautiously. The human has somehow turned a feeding session into a learning experience, he observed, his carapace now stable at its natural color. The creature appears to be studying her as much as she is studying it. Yulin extended his tentacles thoughtfully. Perhaps this is why the Federation Council was wise to accept humans into our academic programs. They possess a perspective that our species have lost through millennia of genetic optimization and environmental control. The Nightmare Weaver had now assumed a form that seemed almost conversational, still clearly alien and dangerous, but no longer radiating the chaotic malevolence that characterized its usual behavior. Its sensory apertures focused on Sarah with what could only be described as curiosity. It wants to understand what I am, Sarah realized. This creature has probably never encountered a species that responds to fear inducement with investigative behavior. We're both learning from this interaction. Dr. Voss was frantically recording everything. The implications for xenopsychology research are staggering. If we can establish communication protocols based on this mutual curiosity response. Don't get ahead of yourself, Sarah cautioned. This thing is still an apex predator. The fact that it's temporarily puzzled by human psychology doesn't make it safe. But it does make it predictable in a way your previous research couldn't achieve. She stepped back from the viewing window. The creature has filed me under unknown variables requiring further study, rather than prey to be consumed. That's probably the best outcome we can hope for. As they prepared to move to the next observation chamber, the Nightmare Weaver remained focused on the space where Sarah had been standing, its form slowly shifting through different configurations, as if still trying to process what it had experienced. The group dynamic had noticeably changed. Where before the other students had treated Sarah as an interesting but ultimately irrelevant curiosity, they now watched her movements with careful attention. Professor Kethmore walked beside her as they moved through the station corridors. Miss Chun, I must ask, did you receive any special training for encounters with psychologically aggressive entities? Sarah shook her head. Just standard human education. We learn about our history, including the darker parts. Stories about things that hunt in the night, ancient myths about monsters, and the heroes who face them. Most species probably think of those as primitive superstitions. But they serve as psychological preparation, the professor realized. Your cultural narratives have preserved response patterns for dealing with existential threats. Exactly. Every human child knows stories about people who walked into dark forests and came back with knowledge. We're taught that curiosity is more powerful than fear, even when fear is completely justified. Dr. Voss caught up to them. Miss Chun, I hope you'll consider extending your stay at Kepler Station. The research opportunities presented by your unique psychological profile could revolutionize our understanding of predator-prey dynamics across the galaxy. Before Sarah could respond, an alarm began sounding throughout the station. Emergency lights bathed the corridors in red, and Dr. Voss's communicator crackled to life. Dr. Voss to containment level 7 immediately. We have a code orange situation with the Void Stalker. The creature has become agitated, and our standard calming protocols are ineffective. Dr. Voss looked at her tablet with growing concern. The Void Stalker is our most dangerous specimen. It was scheduled to be the final observation of your tour, but if it's becoming unstable... She looked directly at Sarah. Miss Chin, I realize this is highly irregular, but would you be willing to attempt contact? Your success with the previous specimens suggests you might be able to calm it before we're forced to implement emergency sedation. The emergency stairwell echoed with the sound of hurried footsteps as the group descended toward containment level 7. The alarm continued its urgent wailing, punctuated by announcements over the station's communication system. All non-essential personnel evacuate Level 7 immediately. Containment Protocol Orange is now in effect for Specimen VX-419. Dr. Voss spoke rapidly into her communicator as they moved. Control, this is Dr. Voss. I'm bringing the academic group to Observation Chamber 7 Alpha. We have a potential solution to the Void Stalker situation. Negative, Dr. Voss, came the reply. Level 7 is sealed. The creature's psychic emanations are affecting equipment on adjacent levels. We're preparing for emergency sedation. Hold that order, she responded firmly. Give me 10 minutes. Professor Keth Moore grabbed Dr. Voss's arm as they reached the Level 7 access door. Dr. Voss, I must protest. Whatever success Miss Chun has had with the other specimens, the Void Stalker is fundamentally different. It doesn't just induce fear or feed on consciousness. It represents a direct threat to the fabric of reality itself. Sarah paused at the sealed blast door. What exactly are we dealing with here? Dr. Voss hesitated, then activated her tablet to display the creature's file. The Void Stalker was discovered at the center of the Nihil Expanse, a region of space where matter itself seems to be gradually dissolving. It exists partially outside our dimensional framework, which allows it to ignore most physical barriers. The image on the tablet showed something that hurt to look at directly. The Void Stalker appeared to be a living absence, a creature-shaped hole in reality surrounded by ribbons of distorted space-time. Where other predators had evolved teeth or claws, this entity had developed the ability to unmake things simply by proximity. It feeds on existence itself, Dr. Voss continued. Not just living matter, but the fundamental forces that hold atoms together. Previous research teams have reported that extended exposure to the creature causes observers to begin questioning whether they themselves are real. Zefka's carapace began shifting colors again. And you want the human to attempt communication with this thing? I want to try, Sarah said, studying the image intently. Every creature we've encountered has been an apex predator from a specific environmental niche. This one evolved in a region where reality itself is unstable, so it developed the ability to manipulate those instabilities. She looked up at the group. But that means it's still following evolutionary logic. It's adapted to hunt prey that exists within normal dimensional parameters. I just need to figure out how to present myself as something outside those parameters. Dr. Voss entered her authorization code into the blast door's security panel. Miss Chun, I must warn you, 3 senior researchers have required complete memory reconstruction after encountering the Void Stalker. The psychological trauma from questioning your own existence is considered irreversible. That's because they went into the encounter assuming they existed in the first place, Sarah replied. Humans have a philosophical advantage here. We've been questioning the nature of reality for thousands of years. Descartes, Kant, the ancient Buddhist concepts of Maya were comfortable with the idea that reality might not be what it seems. The blast door opened with a heavy mechanical sound, revealing a corridor lined with emergency lighting. The normal white illumination of the station had been replaced by deep red warning lights that created an appropriately ominous atmosphere. As they walked toward the observation chamber, Sarah could feel something different in the air itself. The space around them seemed less solid, as if the boundaries between objects had become negotiable. The walls appeared to shift slightly when viewed from peripheral vision, and their footsteps echoed with strange harmonic resonances. The creature's dimensional distortion field, Dr. Voss explained. It's been gradually expanding since the agitation began. If we can't calm it down soon, the distortions could spread throughout the station. They reached Observation Chamber 7 Alpha to find a scene of controlled chaos. Research staff monitored multiple instrument panels while engineers worked frantically on containment field generators. Through the viewing window, the chamber beyond appeared to be filled with something that defied visual processing. The Void Stalker moved through its containment space like a living absence, leaving trails of distorted reality in its wake. Where it passed, The chamber walls flickered between existing and not existing. The creature itself seemed to be constantly shifting between dimensions, appearing solid one moment and translucent the next. Status report, Dr. Voss demanded. Chief Engineer Martinez looked up from his control panel. Containment fields are holding, but barely. The creature's agitation is causing reality fluctuations throughout Level 7. We're seeing quantum uncertainty spikes that shouldn't be possible within normal space-time. What triggered the episode? Sarah asked. Unknown, Martinez replied. The creature was dormant for several hours, then, suddenly, became active, almost as if something had gotten its attention. Sarah studied the chaotic scene in the containment chamber. Unlike the previous creatures, which had demonstrated clear predatory behaviors, the Voidstalker seemed to be searching for something. Its movements weren't random. There was a pattern to how it explored the dimensional instabilities it created. It's looking for a way out, she realized. Not just out of the chamber, out of this dimensional framework entirely. The creature wants to return to its natural environment. Professor Kethmore activated his recording device with shaking hands. Miss Chun, even if you're correct about its motivations, how could you possibly communicate with something that exists partially outside our reality? Sarah approached the viewing window, ignoring the warnings from the research staff. As she got closer to the barrier, the reality distortions became more pronounced. The floor beneath her feet felt uncertain, as if it might stop existing at any moment. By meeting it halfway, she said, pressing her hands against the viewing barrier. The moment she made contact, the Voidstalker's attention snapped to her location. The creature's form solidified slightly as it focused on the observation window, its presence causing the barrier itself to shimmer with uncertainty. Sarah felt the full impact of the creature's existential assault. It was unlike anything she had experienced with the previous specimens. Instead of inducing specific fears or hallucinations, the Voidstalker was attacking the very concept of Sarah's existence. Do you really exist? Asterisk, the creature seemed to whisper directly into her mind. Asterisk, are you certain that you are more than a fleeting dream? Perhaps you are simply a temporary arrangement of atoms that believes itself to be conscious. Perhaps none of this is real. Asterisk, the other observers watched in horror as Sarah began to flicker, her form becoming translucent at the edges. The creature's dimensional distortions were affecting her physical coherence. Miss Chun, Professor Kethmore shouted. Step away from the barrier immediately. But Sarah remained focused on the Voidstalker, even as reality became questionable around her. You're right, she said to the creature, her voice strangely echoing as if coming from multiple dimensions. I might not exist. This entire situation could be an illusion. But here's the interesting thing about humans. We figured that out a long time ago. The creature paused its assault, apparently puzzled by her response. We have a philosophical concept called solipsism, Sarah continued, her form stabilizing slightly. The idea that only one's mind is sure to exist. We also have the simulation hypothesis, the possibility that our entire reality is artificial. Most humans have considered these ideas and learned to function despite them. The Voidstalker's form shifted, becoming more solid as it focused intently on her words. The question isn't whether I exist or not, Sarah explained. The question is whether it matters. Even if I'm just a temporary arrangement of atoms that believes itself conscious, I'm still having experiences. I'm still learning and growing and affecting the world around me. Existence isn't about being permanent. It's about having impact. The creature's dimensional distortions began to fluctuate in what might have been confusion. For something that fed on existential uncertainty, Sarah's comfortable acceptance of that uncertainty was completely outside its experience. You hunt prey that becomes paralyzed when they question their own reality, Sarah continued. But humans question everything all the time. It's how we learn. The fact that I might not exist just makes existence more interesting, not more terrifying. She took a step closer to the barrier, her form now completely stable despite the reality distortions around her. So here's my question for you. If you can unmake things that exist, what happens when you encounter something that might not exist in the first place? The Void Stalker recoiled, as if struck. Its form became increasingly uncertain, flickering rapidly between dimensions. For the first time since its capture, the apex predator of the Nihil Expanse appeared genuinely confused. Impossible, Chief Engineer Martinez whispered, staring at his instruments. The creature's dimensional distortion output is decreasing. It's actually stabilizing local space-time. Dr. Voss checked her readings multiple times. The reality fluctuations are returning to normal parameters. How is she calming a creature that exists outside our dimensional framework? By being comfortable with existing outside frameworks, Sarah replied. This creature evolved to hunt things that are certain about their reality. It doesn't know how to process prey that has already accepted uncertainty as a fundamental aspect of existence. The Void Stalker had retreated to the far end of its containment chamber, where it hovered in what appeared to be deep contemplation. Its form had stabilized into something more traditionally three-dimensional, though it still radiated an aura of otherworldly wrongness. It's trying to process a logical paradox, Sarah observed. How do you unmake something that has already accepted that it might not be real? How do you induce existential crisis in a species that considers existential crisis to be a valuable philosophical exercise? Zefka approached the viewing window cautiously, his carapace now a stable blue color, indicating fascination rather than fear. The human has somehow turned our most dangerous specimen into a philosophy student. The Void Stalker suddenly moved, but not toward the observers. Instead, it began creating patterns in the space around it, controlled distortions that formed complex geometric shapes. The patterns were clearly deliberate, too organized to be random manifestations of its power. It's trying to communicate, Sarah realized. The creature is using dimensional mathematics to create a language structure. She pressed both hands against the viewing barrier and began tapping into the code. Black alarm changed everything about the situation aboard Kepler Station. Dr. Voss's face went pale as she received emergency communications on multiple channels simultaneously. Research staff throughout Level 7 began implementing evacuation protocols that Sarah had never seen practiced. "What's the Omega Vault?" she asked, though part of her suspected she didn't want to know the answer. Dr. Voss hesitated, clearly weighing classification protocols against immediate necessity. "The Omega Vault contains specimens that are classified beyond my clearance level. I know they exist, but I've never been permitted to study them or even know their specific nature." Chief Engineer Martinez was frantically working at his control station. "Dr. Voss, the dimensional resonance from the Void Stalker has triggered something in Omega level. Station Command is requesting immediate consultation with your visiting expert." "I'm not an expert," Sarah protested. "I'm a graduate student who's good at not being afraid of things." "That may be exactly what we need," came a new voice. They turned to see a tall woman in a black uniform approaching through the emergency lighting. Her insignia indicated a rank that none of them recognized, and her presence immediately commanded attention from everyone in the observation chamber. "I am Director Hayes, classification level Omega," she announced. "Miss Chun, your unprecedented success in communicating with our specimens has created both an opportunity and a crisis." Director Hayes activated a holographic display that showed the station's layout in 3 dimensions. "The Omega Vault contains entities that we discovered but cannot classify, study, or contain through normal means. They exist in a state of induced dormancy maintained by environmental controls that we don't fully understand." She highlighted a section of the station far below the current containment levels. "Your dimensional communication with the Void Stalker has created resonance patterns that are awakening something in Omega Vault 7. If it becomes fully active, we will need to evacuate not just the station, but this entire system." Sarah studied the holographic display, noting the massive energy signatures emanating from the vault levels. "What kind of entity requires system-wide evacuation protocols?" "The kind that existed before our current universe," Director Hayes replied grimly. We call it the first dreamer. Our working theory is that it's a remnant from whatever reality preceded the Big Bang. It dreams, and when it dreams, reality reshapes itself to match those dreams. Professor Kethmore's forearms gestured in academic excitement despite the obvious danger. A pre-universal entity? The xenoarchaeology implications are staggering. How is such a being discovered? By accident, Director Hayes said. A deep space archaeological expedition found it at the center of a dead galaxy. The entire stellar formation had been converted into something resembling neural tissue. When they brought a small sample back for study, we realized we had acquired something that shouldn't exist within current physical laws. The emergency communications continued to stream across Dr. Voss's tablet. Director Hayes, what does this have to do with Miss Chen's communication attempts? The first dreamer responds to consciousness, Hayes explained. Not just intelligence, but specific patterns of awareness. Most sentient species in the galaxy think in ways that are too similar to each other. You all evolved within the same universal framework, following similar patterns of logic and reality perception. She gestured towards Sarah. But humans develop differently. Your species retained philosophical frameworks that most others abandoned millennia ago. You're comfortable with paradox, uncertainty, and concepts that exist outside normal logical structures. Sarah began to understand. You think I can communicate with something that predates our universe, because humans never fully adapted to this universe's logical constraints. More than that, Hayes said, we think you might be able to influence what it dreams. The first dreamer's consciousness is so vast that it can't focus on individual details without external guidance. If someone could establish communication and direct its attention towards specific concepts, you could prevent it from accidentally dreaming our reality out of existence, Sarah finished. The station shuddered slightly, and the emergency lighting flickered. Through the viewing window, the Void Stalker was becoming increasingly agitated, its dimensional distortions resonating with whatever was happening in the Omega Vault. Miss Chun, Director Hayes said urgently, I am requesting your assistance with a situation that could affect the survival of our entire galaxy. But I must be clear, the risk to you personally is absolute. Previous attempts to communicate with the first dreamer have resulted in complete ego dissolution. The researchers involved technically survived, but their consciousness became integrated into the entity's dream state. Sarah looked at the panicking students around her, the desperate research staff, and the complex instruments failing to contain forces beyond their understanding. Then, she looked back at the Void Stalker, which was still creating geometric patterns in response to their earlier communication. What would happen if I refuse? We evacuate the system and hope the first dreamer returns to dormancy before its dreams spread beyond local space. Hayes replied honestly. Millions of beings would be relocated, multiple research projects would be lost, and we'd gain no new understanding of pre-universal entities. And if I attempt communication and fail? Worst case scenario, my consciousness gets absorbed into a cosmic entity's dreams, and you still have to evacuate the system. Sarah considered this for a moment. Around her, the other students were watching the exchange with mixtures of admiration and terror. Zefka spoke for the group. Human Sarah, what you have accomplished today has already exceeded anything we believed possible. You have no obligation to risk yourself for our academic expedition. It's not about the expedition anymore, Sarah replied. It's about the chance to learn something that no other human has ever learned. How could I pass that up? She turned to Director Hayes. What do I need to know about establishing communication with a pre-universal entity? Hayes activated her holographic display again, showing new information about the Omega Vault. The first dreamer exists in a specialized chamber that maintains environmental conditions similar to what we theorize existed before the current universal expansion. The atmosphere is composed of elements that shouldn't be stable, and space-time itself functions according to different rules. You'll be wearing a full environmental suit with multiple backup systems, she continued. But The real protection will need to come from your psychological frameworks. The first dreamer's consciousness operates on scales that can overwhelm individual identity. You'll need to maintain a sense of self, while simultaneously being open to communication with something that existed before the concept of self was defined. Dr. Voss stepped forward. Director Hayes, surely there must be other options. Miss Chun is a student, not a trained Xenocontact specialist. Our trained specialists couldn't handle communication with specimens from this universe, Hayes pointed out. The first dreamer requires someone who can think outside universal frameworks entirely. Sarah was already heading toward the exit. Where's the Omega Vault? As they moved through the station toward the deepest levels, the environment around them began to change subtly. The walls seemed older, despite being part of the same structure. The lighting took on strange qualities that suggested the photons themselves were behaving differently. The closer we get to the first dreamer, the more local reality begins to conform to pre-universal physics, Hayes explained. By the time we reach the vault, you'll be operating in a space where the normal rules of existence are merely suggestions. They passed through multiple security checkpoints, each requiring higher classification levels. The other students, and even Professor Kethmore, were restricted from the final descent, leaving only Sarah, Dr. Voss, and Director Hayes to continue into the deepest levels of the station. The Omega Vault was unlike anything Sarah had seen. The chamber was enormous, filled with swirling patterns of light and darkness that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. At the center, suspended in a web of energy fields and environmental controls, was something that challenged perception itself. The first dreamer appeared to be a sphere of condensed space-time, constantly shifting between different states of existence. Sometimes it looked like a massive brain composed of crystallized thought. Other times it seemed to be a miniature universe in the process of being born. Occasionally, it resembled nothing so much as a sleeping god. "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered, and realized she meant it. The environmental suit felt strange as Sarah sealed the final connections. Unlike standard atmospheric protection gear, this suit was designed to maintain not just breathable air and stable pressure, but her fundamental relationship with reality itself. Microgenerators hummed, with energy patterns meant to keep her consciousness anchored to current universal constants. "Final systems check," Director Hayes announced from the control station. "Miss Chun, remember that once you enter the first dreamer's chamber, normal communication may become impossible. The entity exists on temporal scales where your entire conversation could occur in microseconds of real time or extend across geological eras." Sarah adjusted her helmet's display settings. "Any advice for talking to something that predates the universe?" "Be yourself," Dr. Voss replied from the monitoring station. "Your human perspective has been the key to every successful contact today. Don't try to think like something else. Let it figure out how to understand you." The access portal to the first dreamer's chamber opened with a sound that resonated at frequencies that shouldn't exist. Beyond the threshold lay a space that defied geometric analysis. The chamber seemed to be simultaneously enormous and intimate, filled with swirling patterns of light that formed and dissolved according to mathematical principles that predated current physics. Sarah stepped through the portal and immediately felt the difference. Her suit's instruments registered atmospheric conditions that included elements from the periodic table that hadn't been stable since the first moments after the Big Bang. Gravity functioned according to rules that made her feel simultaneously weightless and incredibly heavy. At the center of the impossible space, the first dreamer noticed her approach. The entity's attention was like nothing Sarah had ever experienced. Where the Void Stalker's consciousness had been alien, but comprehensible, the first dreamer's awareness operated on scales that encompassed entire galaxies of thought. Sarah felt her individual identity stretched across vast conceptual distances as the entity attempted to understand what she was. Small consciousness from after beginning. Asterisk came a communication that bypassed language entirely, arriving as pure meaning directly in her mind. Asterisk, you exist in the current dream. How do you maintain coherence in such limited space-time? Asterisk, Sarah forced herself to focus on maintaining her human perspective while responding. I think small thoughts that fit in small spaces. Your consciousness is vast, but mine is concentrated. Different advantages for different problems. The first dreamer's attention shifted, examining her response from multiple dimensional angles simultaneously. Asterisk, interesting small patterns. Most consciousness from current reality attempts expansion to communicate. You maintain compression. This creates novel resonance frequencies. Asterisk, I'm not trying to become something else, Sarah explained, feeling the entity's curiosity like a gentle gravitational field. I'm trying to be the best human I can be. Maybe that's more interesting to you than another attempt at cosmic consciousness. The space around them began to shift as the first dreamer's attention focused more intently. Reality became more fluid, allowing Sarah to perceive glimpses of what existence had been like before the current universe. She saw oceans of possibility where matter and energy hadn't yet differentiated, vast networks of pure thought that extended across dimensions that no longer existed. You seek understanding without transformation. Asterisk, the first dreamer observed. Asterisk, this approach was common in before times. Current universe consciousness typically seeks to become other than what is. Asterisk, maybe that's why my species never fully adapted to this universe, Sarah replied. We kept some of the old ways of thinking. We're comfortable with being what we are while still wanting to learn about everything else. The entity's vast consciousness seemed to brighten with something that might have been pleasure. Asterisk, yes, pattern recognition. Your species maintains paradox comfort. This allows communication across reality barriers. Asterisk, Sarah felt a growing sense of connection with the cosmic entity, but not the ego dissolution that had claimed previous researchers. Instead, it was like two very different types of intelligence, finding common ground through their differences rather than their similarities. The Void Stalker has been helping translate between us, she realized aloud. It exists partially outside current dimensional frameworks, so it can bridge the gap between your pre-universal consciousness and my current reality awareness. Correct assessment. Small void entity serves as dimensional interface. It translates your compressed thoughts into patterns I can process without overwhelming your identity. Asterisk, the implications of this three-way communication began to dawn on Sarah. You've been trying to understand current reality consciousness without destroying it. The Void Stalker is your way of studying how beings like me think without accidentally absorbing our minds into your dream patterns. Precisely understood. I dream reality into existence. But dreams require new input to remain stable. Current universe consciousness provides novel patterns that prevent dream stagnation. Asterisk, Sarah felt a moment of cosmic vertigo as she realized the scale of what the first dreamer was explaining. You're not just dreaming our reality. You're using our thoughts and experiences to keep the dream interesting. Individual consciousness isn't just allowed to exist in your dream. It's necessary for the dream to continue evolving. The space around them pulsed with approval. Asterisk, your species' understanding exceeds predictions. Most current reality consciousness fears absorption into larger patterns. You recognize symbiotic relationship possibility. Asterisk, because humans have always been symbiotic, Sarah said, excitement growing despite the cosmic scale of the conversation. We evolved alongside other species, partnered with dangerous predators, formed alliances with beings that were stronger or faster or had better senses than we did. Symbiosis is how we survived. The first dreamer's attention shifted to include monitoring data from throughout Kepler Station. Asterisk, your companion entities display fear responses to this communication. They expect your consciousness to be consumed or transformed. Asterisk, Sarah considered this, then laughed, a sound that somehow resonated through pre-universal space-time in harmonious patterns. They don't understand that I'm not trying to become something cosmic. I'm trying to be friends with something cosmic. Humans are really good at making friends with things that could kill us. Friendship concept requires mutual benefit without identity loss. Asterisk, the first dreamer mused. You propose relationship or I receive novel consciousness patterns, and you receive expanded understanding while both maintain essential nature. Exactly. You get to experience what it's like to think small, fast thoughts about immediate problems. I get to experience what it's like to think vast, slow thoughts about universal concepts. But we both stay who we are. The entity's response came as a wave of cosmic satisfaction that somehow felt deeply familiar despite operating on incomprehensible scales. Asterisk agreement established. This communication pattern creates stable resonance between reality frameworks. Asterisk through her suit's communication system. Sarah could hear Director Hayes and Dr. Voss monitoring the exchange with amazement. Miss Chun, came Director Hayes's voice. The first dreamer's activity patterns are stabilizing. Whatever you're discussing, it's having a calming effect on both the entity and the associated dimensional distortions throughout the station. Sarah opened a communication channel back to the control room. We've established a friendship protocol. The first dreamer isn't trying to absorb or transform anyone. It just wants to exchange interesting thoughts with consciousness that operates differently than its own. Your companion entities may participate in expanded communication network. Asterisk the first dreamer offered. Void entity translation capabilities allow safe interface for multiple consciousness types. It's offering to set up a permanent communication network, Sarah translated. Using the Void Stalker as a dimensional translator, other researchers could safely communicate with pre-universal consciousness without risking ego dissolution. The implications were staggering. Direct communication with an entity that had witnessed the birth of the current universe could revolutionize every field of scientific study. Philosophy, physics, consciousness research, the fundamental nature of reality itself. All could be explored through controlled interaction with the first dreamer. But more than that, Sarah realized as she prepared to return in normal space-time, humanity had just established its first truly alien friendship. Not with a species that shared their evolutionary background or universal framework, but with something genuinely other, and that otherness had become the foundation for understanding rather than fear. As she exited the first dreamer's chamber, Sarah found the entire station staff gathered in the observation area. Students, researchers, engineers, and administrative personnel all watched as she emerged from direct contact with a pre-universal entity. Professor Keth Moore was the first to speak. Miss Chun, you have fundamentally altered our understanding of consciousness, communication, and humanity's place in the cosmic order. What do you plan to do with this experience? Sarah considered the question as she removed her helmet, looking around at the faces of beings from across the galaxy who were all staring at her with mixtures of awe, respect, and curiosity. I think, she said finally, I'd like to continue my studies. There are a lot more interesting things out here to become friends with. The laughter that followed was universal, transcending species barriers as effectively as fear once had. But where fear had divided, understanding was bringing them together. And somewhere in the depths of Kepler Station, a pre-universal entity continued to dream reality into existence. Its vast consciousness now enriched by the friendship of one small human who had proven that courage, curiosity, and the willingness to remain yourself could overcome any barrier. As the formal academic expedition concluded and arrangements were made for ongoing research partnerships, Sarah realized that her acceptance into the xenobiology program had been just the beginning of her education. The universe was vast and full of dangerous, wonderful things, and humanity was finally ready to meet them all as equals. Miss Chun, Director Hayes said quietly, are you prepared to make contact with something that dreams reality into existence? Sarah stepped toward the environmental suit preparation area, but paused when she noticed something unexpected. The geometric patterns that the Void Stalker had been creating were appearing here too, manifested in the energy fields surrounding the first dreamer. The creatures are already in communication with each other, she realized. The Void Stalker wasn't just responding to me. It was translating my communication attempt for something else. Director Hayes checked her instruments with growing amazement. You're right. The dimensional resonance patterns from level 7 are being amplified and modified before reaching the Omega Vault. The Void Stalker has been serving as an intermediary, which means, Sarah said with growing excitement, I'm not trying to establish first contact with an incomprehensible cosmic entity. I'm continuing a conversation that's already in progress. As she began suiting up for direct communication with the first dreamer, Sarah couldn't help but smile. Humanity's greatest strength had always been its ability to make friends with dangerous things. She was about to find out if that applied to entities that could reshape reality with their dreams. Rhythmic pattern, using the sound vibrations to create her own geometric responses in the chamber spacetime. The Void Stalker responded immediately, adjusting its patterns to match her rhythm. Remarkable, Professor Ketmur Breed. She's established first contact with a creature from outside our dimensional framework. The xenolinguistics implications alone. But before anyone could fully process what they were witnessing, Sarah's successful communication with the Void Stalker triggered something unexpected. The patterns the creature was creating began to resonate with something else entirely, something that had been dormant in the deepest levels of Kepler Station. Emergency alarms began sounding throughout the facility, but these were different from the containment breach warnings. These were the alerts reserved for the station's most classified research, the specimens that even Dr. Voss didn't have clearance to discuss. Code Black came the announcement over the communication system. All personnel prepare for potential station-wide evacuation. Something in the Omega Vault has awakened. Professor Keth Moore protested immediately. Absolutely not. The Void Stalker has killed researchers through reinforced barriers. This is far too dangerous. But Sarah was already heading toward the emergency stairwell. How dangerous can it be? It's just another predator that doesn't understand what humans are. As they rushed through the station toward the containment breach, none of them could have predicted that Sarah was about to face something far more challenging than simple fear-based creatures. The Void Stalker represented an entirely different category of cosmic horror, one that even her human adaptability might not be enough to handle. Gestured toward the exit. We should move to the next observation chamber. But, Miss Chun, would you be willing to participate in some additional testing? Your unique response could provide valuable insights into predator-prey dynamics. As the group began to move away from the Terradrake's chamber, Sarah took one last look back. The creature was still watching her, but its posture had changed subtly. The aggressive hunting stance had been replaced by something more neutral, the way one predator might acknowledge another's territory. The other students gave her space as they walked, looking at her with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. She had just done something that seasoned researchers couldn't manage. She had faced down one of the galaxy's most terrifying creatures and made it back down. But Sarah knew this was just the beginning. If Dr. Voss was right about the other creatures they would see today, she was about to discover just how far humanity's predatory heritage would take her into the dark corners of the galaxy's nightmares.